Hello, fellow YouTubers and vinyl community. This is True Audio Files, and welcome to another edition of Sound Quality Shootout. So this time, I'm going to be comparing Dave Brubeck Quartet's Time Out. And I only have two options that I'm going to be testing out right now on this one, or I should say not testing out, but evaluating and basically giving my opinion on. So the first one is going to be a early pressing. It's a 6-eye stereo, and it is a later 6-eye stereo. It's probably, if I had to venture a guess, 2 or 3 pressings later than the original first pressing, but still very early and in pretty good shape. And then the next one I'm going to evaluate is the Analog Productions version, and this is the 45 RPM. So this is on two records, and faster playtime, obviously 45 RPM. And for those of you who know, most of you should, but if you're watching this, right? It was cut by Bernie Grundman back, I want to say, it was quite a while ago. I can't remember now. It was probably about 10 years ago. Maybe some of you guys will know. I should have done my research, but I'm not good at doing that all the time. So basically, those are two of the better pressings. When asked about which ones to go with, those are kind of the ones that I hear about. I have heard from different people varying opinions on them. Like the Analog Pressings one, I've heard people say it's thin and bright, and that you should just go for the earlier pressings, and it doesn't really matter which one you go with because they all sound pretty good, so on and so forth. So I decided I wanted to do a shootout and give you my take on them. So I would have to say that as usual, they both sound great. The Analog Productions version is definitely something that is obvious that it's kind of a newer cutting, because it's got a more full frequency response. It's got deeper bass and probably a higher treble as well. Goes higher up in the frequency range as well, and it also has a wider soundstage. I'm guessing that's partially, again, part of the cutting decisions that are made back, especially back in the late 50s or so. They wanted to make sure that these were going to be able to be played back on everybody's turntables. And if you had the wider frequency range, especially the deeper bass information, and if you it just made it so it could potentially skip on your turntables, especially the less expensive turntables. You had that potential risk. Also, with the greater frequency range, or the lack of the greater frequency range, that's just so you could kind of fit more information onto a side, and maybe space out the grooves a little bit more as well. But because the Analog Production one is a 45 RPM, that's actually going to be less of an issue, because of the fact, obviously, you're going to have less information on each side. So my take on them. So if I were to characterize them a little bit deeper, I would definitely say that they both have their merit, and both have, I could listen to both and not have to worry about it, or not, not say they sound awful. But I'd say the one thing that really stands out to me is, the Analog Production one has definitely got a little bit more brightness to it. Some people definitely would classify that as too bright. I personally like it. I could see why people could think it's too bright, because it definitely can sound a little bit not as natural on the cymbals. But where I think it actually shines, it does a few things because it's brighter. It actually seemed a little bit more open. You hear the bass slaps a lot cleaner and crisper. You hear the breathing when they're playing the saxophone on it better. The piano and the snare drum have a little bit more crispness, and just can hear them better, I feel, when you have that more frequency range, and higher frequency range, I should say, or more high frequency, I should say. But one of the things that really stood out to me, and I should probably preface this by saying I only listened to 2 tracks to do this A-B. So I did Blue Ronda a la Turk and Take 5. So the one thing that really stood out to me was on Take 5, there's every so often you hear a deep bass hit, which it's either the floor tom or the bass drum. I'm not sure which, but it's really noticeable on the AP and on the I probably wouldn't have even picked up on it at all on the original 6i if I didn't know it was already there and listening for it when I tried to go back and forth between the 2 different pressings. So I would say overall, though, I guess the best way for me to describe it, because the Analog Productions version has more high frequency, for lack of a better way to describe it, and it just seems like a film has been lifted off. And I know it's not the case. It's just because there's more high frequency. There's a high frequency boost there, but that's the impression it gives when that a higher frequency or the more high frequency is there. I don't know if they necessarily boosted the high frequency on the Analog Productions, where it was probably more that they maybe turned it down a little bit on the original one, just because if you have too much high frequency, and especially if it goes too far beyond the standard frequency response, you have the danger of screwing up the cutting head, and those could be quite expensive and to repair, and can definitely cause some time issues. So time not being able to cut vinyl. So, but the overall, like I said, the Analog Productions one definitely had a wider sound stage. I would say they were probably pretty equal when it comes to the depth, but you definitely had that greater feeling of separation between the instruments. Not a lot, but a little bit with the Analog Productions. And again, I think because of the high frequency boost, you also had a better feeling of the reverb that's in the room or added. I'm not sure if it's probably a combination of the 2, but you definitely heard that and felt that presence more on the Analog Productions one. Again, probably because of the high frequency being boosted a little bit more, but it also just seemed, the original one definitely had probably a little bit more mid bass to it, but I felt that sort of muddied it up, or it gave the impression of muddying it up a little bit, especially with the bass guitar. It just didn't seem as it seemed not as natural. It didn't seem as accurate as the Analog Production one. So, other than that, I'd say, like I said, I think I think you'd be happy with either one. Both sounded great, but I definitely would give the edge to the Analog Productions one. I would say, if you're not a fan of cymbals that are, sound a little brighter than they should, and you want that little bit more natural sounding cymbal, I think that the 6i stereo will definitely give you that. But what you give up is a little bit, not quite as wide of a sound stage, and not as good of an ability to hear, the vibration of the strings on the bass and the breathing of the saxophone player and things like that. And you definitely don't pick up on that deeper bass hit in Take 5 that happens every so often. That was really, really noticeable. So that's my take. I would definitely say my go-to one would definitely be the Analog Productions one. I'm sorry, but both are awesome. Like I said, you want a little more natural sounding cymbal, you go with the 6i stereo. If you want kind of that better overall presence, kind of a better feeling of dynamics to it because of the deeper bass and the higher treble, then I would say go with the Analog Productions one. And that one's a lot easier to find right now anyways. It's a little pricey, but I would imagine that it's probably not a whole lot more, if not similar in price to like a 6i or early pressing stereo version of this. So I think either way you're going to probably spend similar amounts of money. Maybe if you catch the Analog Productions one on sale, you get it for a little bit better deal. So That's my take. I would really love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you have, 6-eye stereo, original 6-eye stereo, and the Analog Productions 45 RPM, or even the 33 RPM? I would love to hear what you think and, get your take on it in the comments section below. So if you liked what you see here, please like the video. If you want to see more videos from me, please subscribe and then hit that alert button. That little bell, and to let you know when I make the new videos. So that's all I've got for this time around. Thank you, vinyl community and everybody else, and you guys have a great day.